Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this month's development event, which is the first of our new academic year. The topic for this month's event is what can sport teach us about teamwork and other skills, and how we can take those and apply them to our own professional and career development. As I'm sure many of us know, sport is incredibly beneficial to so many different aspects of people's lives, from making friends, helping you stay fit and healthy, providing some, including all of our panelists here today, careers and the opportunity to compete at the very highest level of their respective sports. It's great. I'm biased, but it's great. Sport can also help teach many vital skills that transfer across not just career but personal development. These things include teamwork, communication, coping with adversity, or many different things. So how do we take these skills that we learn from sport and that we learn from team working and apply them to careers, professional development, and life after sport if you are somebody who's moving on from being a professional athlete? So our four panelists today are all current or former professional athletes, and they'll be sharing their insights, their experiences, their knowledge, their hard-won wisdom about the skills that sport can teach us, the positive and sometimes maybe negative aspects that come out of those, and what maybe to spot to avoid anything negative feedback, and how to apply maybe some of their very hard-earned experience to your own personal situations. So without any further ado, and enough of me chatting on, I will introduce our panelists, beginning with Shaka.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shaka Hislop, former Newcastle United goalkeeper, former professional goalkeeper. I currently work for ESPN in the United States, covering football. I'm the founding patron and honorary president and current interim chair of anti-racism charity Show Racism the Red Card.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Anuradha, on to you.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite, of course. And my name is Anuradha Doddaballapur. I'm the current captain for the German women's cricket team. I'm sure you're wondering, Germany does play cricket. Yes, it does. But professionally, I'm a biomedical scientist. I did my master's in medical genetics in Newcastle University almost a decade ago. I'm also an ECB level 3 coach, and I founded the first women's team in the state of Hessen, where I'm based. And yeah, look forward to the chat ahead.
That's great. Thanks very much. And Allison, to you next.
Hello, everybody. Again, echo what everyone said. Thanks for having me today. So sports-wise, I play football for Sunderland, another goalkeeper on the panel today. Professionally, I studied postgraduate medicine at Newcastle University and worked as a junior doctor, and currently I'm a public health and education fellow in Northumbria Trust. So thanks very much.
That's great. Thank you very much. And finally, Emily, on to yourself.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Emily Ford. I am currently on the GB rowing team and just come back from competing in the Czech Republic at the World Rowing Championships. I am also an athlete rep for the GB rowing team, and I don't have a career alongside that at the moment.
No problem. Thanks very much, everybody. It's lovely to have you all on board. We'll just get started with some of the various questions. I think probably the best question to ask is how does being part of a team help with leadership skills? I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with as you get on, especially as you go further up into your career. So is there anything that you've learned being an athlete and being part of a team that has helped you with those sort of skills? And I think I'll probably come to Anu first, as I know you set up the cricket team.
Yeah, I mean, lots of life skills, I would say, not just professionally. And I've been very fortunate to also now have the opportunity to lead the German women's team. So it's quite a responsibility, but also the fact that you get to interact with people, some from multiple backgrounds, and so learning to work with people and trying to bring the best out of them. So you sort of take that from sport, and I also try to apply that at work, running a lab and working with students or so. So for me, the main thing has been working as a team and developing good communication skills and being decisive and trying to get that buy-in from your group towards a common vision or goal. So those are sort of key points for me.
That's great. Thanks very much. Alison, I'll come to you next, I guess, to sort of echo the question or to build on what Anu said, which is sort of how has being part of a team helps build those kind of leadership and communication skills.
Yeah, I think it's been massive. I think, like Anu said, in sport, you have individuals from all sorts of different backgrounds, and I think as part of teamwork and leadership, you have to learn to identify those strengths and weaknesses of individuals and how to best utilize those and make the most of working towards a common goal. And I think the leadership skills and communication skills you develop in sport translate really well to the workplace when you're trying to, again, work with people who might have come from different backgrounds or have different ideas about how to approach something.
That's great. Thanks, Steve. Shaka, to you as well. We'll start with the same question with everybody, and then we'll diverge. So, what kind of things, sort of leadership skills or extra skills, did you pick up from teamwork?
I'll build on what Anu and Alison just said, and I think the value, especially in team sports, which we play, you recognize the value of leadership, and oftentimes when we talk about leadership in any context, the focus is on the CEO of a company or the captain of the team or the manager. I think when you participate in team sport, you recognize how everybody plays their part towards that leadership. Because you share in that common goal, you are both relying on a number of people around you. In my case, as a goalkeeper, people in front of me, but you also recognize that they're also relying on you similarly, and you have to embrace what leadership means at that moment for your specific role, for your specific standing within a team. When I was a young goalkeeper coming up, it looked very different from when I was 36 years old and nearing retirement. Exactly what leadership meant for me. So just understanding those roles as it pertains to you, whatever your position is on the field or position is in the organization.
That's great. Thanks very much. I think that's it's nice that everybody's echoing all the same points, which is great. Emily, to you finally for the first question before we branch out.
Yeah, so I think I've learned a lot with leadership through sport. When I was at school, I was very shy and would barely talk to anybody, and then got into the team environment and into sport, and it pushed me completely out of my comfort zone, because you, like everyone said, you've got to work as a team to get the best out of each other. And like, especially in a crew boat and rowing, you need to sort of make sure everyone's doing the same things. You've got to work together and lead each other to get the best out of each other and get the boat going quickly. So I think, yeah, sport gives a lot of teamwork and then also a lot of leadership. But you do often have to push yourself out of your comfort zones to be able to, I guess, get that and become a leader as such. But again, it doesn't need to be like you said, like a CEO of a company or anything like that. You can lead in a lot smaller ways than that, and it will start and build to become a better working environment.
That's great. I think it's a really good point that I know Emily and Shaka, you both touched on, which is leadership is often defined as this idea of some nebulous person at the top that is the flag bearer and everybody else follows, but actually leadership is needed every day in all different aspects, even down to things as simple as leading a workshop online, and it's trying to make sure you use those skills that you can pick up from sport in those everyday bits and pieces about not only how and when to take ownership of being a leader, but also when to recognize that somebody else might be better placed, and not necessarily to have to fight that person or try and compete with that person and say, you know what, they're better placed for this bit, so we'll follow their lead for this instance, which I think is important. I want to change tack. I'm going to go down a little bit before we try and come back to the positives, which I guess one of the questions that came up and I think is important is, are there any sort of skills or experiences that you've had or that you've learnt as part of a team when you've gone through periods of adversity that you can then transfer across? Because obviously it's great when everything's going gangbusters and you're winning and everybody's doing really well and everybody's pulling the same direction, but actually a lot of the hard won skills you get when you're struggling or when something bad's happened or you've not done as well as you've hoped. And I guess what kind of experiences or skills have you taken from that? I'm going to come to Shaka first, just because you're top left on my screen.
No problem. I think there's a value to being that leader through troubled times and taking some of that responsibility that I don't think people recognize, or certainly outside of. And I forgive me, I keep bringing everything back to team sport. I think anybody outside of the team recognizes. And just to put that in some perspective, so a couple of years ago, Liverpool were going through a really bad time. They weren't playing well, and Jurgen Klopp kept selecting James Milner to play in his midfield. James Milner, very experienced, very respected, particularly in that Liverpool dressing room. And the criticism around that selection was every time Jurgen Klopp picked Milner, the team wasn't playing well, or the team lost, and it was a terrible start. But when that, which was absolutely true, kind of looking at it from outside, but the value to that, and I think particularly in the context of our discussion, is Jurgen Klopp recognizing that the team isn't playing well, had to rely on his big personalities, those people who can step into a team, make a bad team play better, and if that didn't translate into results, could take some of that, could take that heat, had the experience to know better. And I always remember that, and I feel it's a valuable story to tell. In that the leadership in times of crisis, in times of trouble, looks very different from leadership when things are going well, even in terms of accelerating an organization or whatever it may be. And you have to understand that it also takes a different mindset for that individual, that they understand the role that they have to play. So that it's kind of I always feel like that story in terms of leadership in troubled waters. It kind of nails what's needed from a team concept.
Yeah, I think that's completely right. And one of the key things that comes out of that kind of adversity is you figure out which people and how to build resilience. It's easy when it's going well, but you have to have those people who have the tough mindset and the mentality to be able to take criticism on the chin, work through that period of uncertainty, or just a poor performance in any career, and be able to switch it around and provide that leadership. I completely agree. Alison, I guess I'll come to you with sort of a continuation, which is specifically when it comes to like adversity. Is there some sort of key learning point that you've taken out of any particularly troubled times? Is it resilience? Is it maybe just keeping your head above the parapet, below the parapet? Any of those sort of things?
Yeah, I feel like I have a lot I could say about this, and I'm sure Shaka would relate to me that when things are not going well as a goalkeeper, it's one of the loneliest places you can be, and certainly a position that I think forces you, or you get to develop a lot of resilience and a lot of kind of mental toughness, because it's even from an early age, it's always easy to blame the goalkeeper, and it's always easy to make the goalkeeper the scapegoat. And while other people on the pitch, as a goalkeeper, you could make hundreds of saves, but the one mistake is what they focus on. So I think from an individual perspective, playing in goal and working in when things aren't going well, or when you're the one not playing because only one of you can play, versus other positions on the pitch, I think you have to really develop resilience and determination, which I think has been really pivotal to kind of when I went into my professional career in healthcare, particularly when you think of working during COVID or the pandemic or in really difficult times in healthcare. I felt like that was a strong attribute that I had. But from a more team side of things, I think, it's a lot easier to be a leader, as you said, when things are going well. But when they're not going well, I think that's where you really see kind of maybe your natural leaders or the true character of people shows up when teams not getting results, when they're in a relegation scrap, whatever it might be. And I think kind of the staying together, staying united and together in those hard times is probably the most crucial thing, because it's very easy to start blaming somebody or fighting inwardly, but you really want to still have that united front. And I think a lot of things have gotten better from the sports side of things, whether that's psychological support or maybe less of a blame culture, a more supportive environment. But yeah, those tough times are what define you, and those are the time you learn the most about yourself and about your team. In those tough times, you learn more probably when you lose a match than when you win a match. So yeah, I would echo everyone's going to say, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think
let me just say, Jeremy, having two goalkeepers on this call is an absolute masterstroke. Allison and I
it might turn into a therapy session.
We're just going to be hyping each other up all call long. Oh, crying at each other's shoulders.
No.
Oh, goodness.
I'm going to 100% take credit and say I completely planned it this way. Yeah, I guess it is the two good points that I'd reiterate from what Alison said is one, not that you should have a finger point, but if you're going to do that when stuff isn't going well, do it internally, but present a united front. You don't want to show people that if you're making mistakes, that where those mistakes are coming from. I think something important to talk about, which we may get onto, is being able to own up to those mistakes, because there are some times when you're in a negative experience or a negative environment, you can't be seen to show any weakness, otherwise you just get piled on. And so being able to build that positive culture when things aren't going well is super helpful. I think sort of the final point to echo would be, it's good to learn from those people in the hard times. If you watch somebody who is just really good at dealing with stuff when the chips are down, when you're going through a struggle, that's the person that you want to go talk to. Like, how do I do that? How do I step up when times are tough? Emily, I'll come to you to continue that conversation in terms of experiences, skills, learning points through times of adversity. I guess it might be slightly different because for rowing, especially in the boat, it's a much smaller environment than a team of 11 or even the full 23 for a football team.
Yeah, so I think often another thing in sport that can set you back is like illness and injury. They're quite common. And often it's you yourself that's got to get better. But you actually do need that team around you to support you through that, because it's hard if you've got an injury, for example, and you're taken out of the boat, you've got to then work on yourself, but you still need the support network around you to know that everything is going to be all right. And I think often you need to just take a step back and actually work through things a bit more logically, because it's quite easy to just everything to blow up. And I think it's good thing is to just sit down and be like, right, what is step one? Like, you need to, rather than thinking so far ahead of where I've got to get to, it's thinking of how you're going to get there. And then using the people around you, like in sport, there's like all the psychologists, all the science team that are there to help you. And yeah, so I think it's just realizing who there is there that you can work together and get through it better. I think I learned a lot from the Olympics last year. We didn't have the result that we wanted, and there was a lot of things that went on, and it took quite a while for me to process that. And it wasn't probably until sort of May, April time this year that I understood what had happened. So that's another thing I think I've learned, is not to be so hard on yourself that you can't process something in the first few weeks or the first few months, for an example. Like, just give yourself time and don't rush things, and make sure it's processed so you can actually move forward from it. Because if it's just still there in the back of your mind, you're not going to be able to move ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point to make. Two excellent points to make. One of which is you don't have to shoulder everything on your own. There is a support network in almost every aspect, either personal or professional lives. And if you need help, there's almost always people out there to give you a hand. And you're right. If stuff goes wrong, if stuff doesn't go the way you expect, or if you've made a massive mistake at work or something, take the time to process that. Because usually when stuff first goes wrong, your first reaction is an emotional one, which isn't wrong, but sometimes you need a bit of space to then go back to it and go, okay, what have I learned from this? How can I build and make sure that I don't repeat those, or learn to be different or better from that instance? I think that's a really valid point, that it's important to acknowledge when things go wrong or when mistakes are made, and to work through those so you can develop, rather than just stick in that treadmill of doing the same thing over and over again. And I'll come to you last about that kind of adversity conversation before we move on to some of the Q&As.
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of things the other panelists shared as well. And I think playing in a team sport, we've all probably been in those situations where decisions have been made and people have been questioned for that, for the good or bad. And I think as a captain, that's also something you learn to sort of take in your stride, because with cricket, when the team wins, the team has done a great job. When the team loses, it's bad decisions by the captain, whether you brought in a specific bowling change, or you put your batting order a certain way, or you placed your fielders somewhere. But you take that in your stride. But again, some individuals maybe are having a bad day. So I think as a leader, you still have to back them up, and you've got to instill that confidence so that they can come back the next day and perform better. And we always take time to reflect after a game, to just have a short chat to see how people are feeling, and to kind of support each other, because when the chips are down, it is still your teammates and your support staff that you go to. And considering I've never played in a professional environment, so all of the cricket I've played, whether it was in India or in England or now in Germany, it's still an amateur sport here. So I think we do rely on each other as teammates for that support if we're not able to tap in outside. But yeah, there are bad days, there are good days, but it's really pulling along together. And I think that's something we as a unit are quite proud of, and especially in terms of injuries and having to support those people to sort of come back into the squad, and sharing the fact that what things are discussed within the group is a safe environment, and that people can talk about how they feel, whether they're having a bad day or they're having tough times, and sort of being resilient and wanting to come back and perform better. So I think that's where some of the leadership skills do come in, but again, it's what we feed off each other. And I think that's one of the best things about team sport, that you can do that together as a group.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an interesting it's come through quite clearly on some of the on the conversations we've had, which is leadership is something that you learn from team skills, but being a leader can be very lonely when the chips are down. And I really like the team did well when you're winning, but it's your fault when things are going wrong. And I do think if you are in a leadership position, it's worth understanding that sometimes when fingers are pointed, it really isn't your fault. It's you are getting scapegoated. And that's fine. That's a whole separate, massive, long conversation we won't get into. But if you're not in a leadership position, try and really think, if stuff's going wrong, if mistakes are being made, if you're in a tough position, don't automatically point to, oh, it's not my fault, it's that guy's fault because he's at the head, because that's not fair on that individual, and that's not really fair on yourself, because you're not taking on board any of the things that you might be able to do to either improve yourself or improve the situation. So finger pointing doesn't necessarily always work very well. And we had a couple of questions come through on the Q&A, so I'm just going to hop over to those. So the first one is, have you learned any particular skills or got any particular advice about providing or indeed receiving feedback? And how do you think you can get through to people who are really resistant to taking on board coaching, criticism, advice in that manner? Because obviously that is sometimes an intensely frustrating part of being a team, when you can see somebody doing something wrong and they just will not take it on board that they're doing something that's not helpful. Emily, I'm going to come to you first.
Gosh, that's quite a difficult question.
It is,
yeah. So I guess taking feedback for yourself, I think you if people you don't think maybe giving it to you in a constructive way, I think make sure that you spin it in your own head as being meant to be a constructive criticism, if you like. Because I think some people often can be a bit rash with how they say things, or especially in sport. But the fact that every time we go rowing, we all get coached and given feedback, it's being able to learn how to take what's being said in a positive light and using it in the best way for yourself. I think often we struggle as athletes when we want to give, say, the coaches feedback. I think we sometimes feel like we get a bit of a pushback on that. And often it can just be that they maybe not in the right frame of mind for the feedback, or it's the wrong time. So I think having to think about the way you're saying it and the time that you're saying it, and making sure they haven't got 1,000 other things going on at the same time, and that they're able to actually think about what you're saying rather than saying it maybe in the moment isn't necessarily the right time. And it might be that you talk to them later in the day when they're just a bit more free and a bit more calmer, and you sit down and say, look, this happened earlier and I just think that I could give you this bit of feedback and we could do this bit differently.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of the most complicated things to do, which is specifically managing up effectively. Like, receiving feedback is one thing from somebody who is, in a position of power in the loosest term from like a coach's perspective. But if you're noticing stuff that you need to provide back, that is often a very tricky thing to do, because often it's not taken in the manner that it's provided.
Yeah.
Let's say that. I guess, Emily, just a quick follow-up before I ask some of the people, is that have you found that sometimes, especially if you have to go up to a coach or to somebody who's seen as a leader in the boat, is it helpful to have more than one person, or does that sometimes backfire? Or do you find it's contextual whether or not you need like maybe two of you to sit the coach down and say, look, this is a thing?
No, I've actually learned I think it's actually better as an individual going on your own. So being athlete rep, you have to sort of deal with some quite difficult situations, and often if it involves that individual, I sort of say to them, like, do you want to come with me and we'll work through it together, or would it be more beneficial if I went on my own? And I mean, it differs with different people. They may want to come with me or whatever, but I often think if it's just a one-on-one conversation, it can be a bit more productive than having somebody else chipping in.
Yeah.
Too many cooks and all that. But yeah, I think often it's easier just having a honest head-to-head one-on-one conversation.
Yeah, that's good to know. It's interesting. It's always interesting to hear about how people tackle that. Anyway, I'll come to you next about the same sort of questions, like how do you deal with providing or receiving feedback, especially to people who might be resistant to it, because obviously I appreciate that you do have ECP qualifications, so you obviously do coaching, so you might have some particular insights on this one.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting to be on both sides of the game, if I may say, because as a player, I think in the years of playing, I think I've had coaches who've been very harsh with feedback, or at least I thought that they were very harsh with feedback. But it sort of comes down to what Emily said in terms of the timing, and also it's not just what you say, it's also how you say it. And I think that's something now as a coach I'm very mindful of. And also that you try and put that out, of course, as constructive feedback. And what we say is the sandwich method, where you've got something positive to share, and then an area that they should be worked on, or what can you as well do to facilitate that, and then sort of again wrap it up with a positive. So I think the way you give feedback is actually quite crucial. And we do encounter quite a few individuals, and I particularly think it's harder to coach adults in that sense, because youngsters and kids, they've got a different way of like receiving coaching tips and aids, and they sort of look up to you as a role model, and they're happy to take everything you give. So that's another responsibility to uphold. But as adults, it's great that people question and challenge you. So you still have to have something relevant and something that kind of you can get through to that individual, because their mindset, the way they think, how they perceive stuff is quite different. So sometimes it is quite hard. It probably takes longer than you think, but it's about working together. So as a coach, when you're giving feedback, it's about ensuring that they know what you're talking about and why that is good for them, and also sort of offering that opportunity for them to reflect on it a bit before you just having to do a one-way communication. So it has been a lot of learning. And I think now as a player as well, when I do get feedback from the coaches, I'm also thinking of, why was this put a certain way? So it's interesting to be in both positions.
Yeah, I completely agree. Alison and Shaka, I'm going to switch it a little bit. It's still about how you give and receive feedback, but I guess like looking at the second part of the question a little bit, which is how do you get through? Have you got any experience of watching people get through when they've been really resistant to taking feedback? Because everybody knows that hard-headed individual that no matter what you say, they're just not going to take it on board. What have you had any experience with that? Is there any sort of advice or insight, even if it's just you got to wait till they really do do something terrible, and then it's like, look, we've told you, now you need to learn, I guess. So Shaka, I guess I'll come to you for that one.
That's a little difficult for me to answer. In that sport, by its nature, if you don't take on feedback, if you don't learn from it, you'll be replaced. Quite simply, there's no other way to put it. So that in itself means that you have to be a willing recipient of criticism when it does come. I guess the big complaint is it doesn't always come in a way that you understand, that helps you. But because of the nature of the game, and say the professional side of the game, you have to figure that out. So there is some responsibility on the person receiving that feedback. There's just as much responsibility as there is to someone who's giving it. So that for me is kind of one of my takeaways, in that you have to, even when it's not timely, even when it's not properly explained, you also have a responsibility just for your own livelihood to figure it out and take it on board and learn from it.
Yeah, I think it sounds terrible. I do think that's a good point, which is, if you keep resisting taking coaching, or you're trying to coach somebody or provide somebody feedback and they keep not taking it, at the end of the day, there will always come a line beyond which, like, well, either we're not going to help you, or in almost every job, it's like, if you're going to be that much of a disruptive force, or that individual is that much of a disruptive force, they will start to think about how they can find ways to replace you, really bluntly. And I do think that's something that people have to be aware of, that there are always limitations in any job and any career that you do, beyond which people are going to start to look at it like, is this more trouble than it's worth? And if it is, how do we start to move that person on, or move that situation away? And I do think that's something that people have to take on board, which is not always a nice thing to hear, but you have to take the good with the bad on both aspects of that. Alison, just to you to wrap up on that sort of conversation around feedback, especially if you've got anybody who's been particularly, let's say, difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, like Shaka said, in the elite sport environment, it's going to be to your detriment if you don't take feedback. But I think maybe to examine the question or the idea more closely, I guess, leadership, management, feedback, like, it can never be a one size fits all approach. And I think that, maybe trying to understand why that person isn't taking feedback or appears hard-headed, or what's going on. And it can range from lots of different things, whether that's, maybe things that are going on for them outside of the sporting environment or professional environment, or getting to know them as individuals. But I also think the more you get to know people as individuals, the more you probably learn what suits them best. And I guess this comes back to the feedback idea, is that, even I can think of players that I play with who they respond best to kind of criticism and getting angry, and that fires them up, and that's when you get the best performances out of them. But then I can equally think of players who that kind of communication, they just shut down and you're not going to get anything from them, and they need a lot more. If they've made a mistake, they need a lot more support and being built up and reassured and things like that. And I think it's your job as teammates or leadership, but like the management side of things, of really knowing your players or your employees if it's a workplace, and knowing, you know, what is it that makes them thrive, and then what are the best ways to provide feedback to them, and let that be, you know, and that might be led by them and really getting to know them as individuals. But yeah, that's probably what I'd say.
I really like that point. I think it's a takeaway that is useful, not just in sport or career, but in all aspects of your life, which is that people learn and take feedback differently. What may work for you will work for your friends, doesn't work for another group of friends or another member of staff that you're working with. And while it is work to do, learning how that person takes criticism, positive, negative learning experiences, all the rest of it, is vital, because it makes the whole process more harmonious. Because if you're just doing the same thing, if you're doing the classic Alex Ferguson hairdryer treatment to everybody, some people are just going to shut down, as you said. And that's really important to understand, that sometimes you need to take different approaches to different individuals. That's great. Another question we came through, which is, have you, I guess it's from experience, have you learned some of the flags or indicators where decisions you've made have directly affected either your career as, I guess, as a whole, or your place in a team, or your position as a leader, like looking back on it, or in current positions, I guess. Have you been able to spot some of those indicators where it goes, oh, actually, this was a big decision, and it's led into this, or it's does that make sense? To everybody, I'm getting slightly confused faces, because so the question is, are there specific scenarios where decisions you've made during training or an event have affected the direction of your career? And I guess what I'm trying to take out of that is, are there any sort of indicators that you can pick up on where you think this is going to be a big decision, or actually is it sometimes the smallest decisions have the biggest knock-on effects, and you just got to make the best choice in that sort of situation as the time comes? I guess I'll come to Shaka first, because everybody else seems
thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Just drop you the difficult question, Shaka. It's fine.
Listen, on the surface of it, and Allison would understand this. The decisions I make, you kind of know whether they're good or bad. You get immediate feedback as to who's celebrating right after, you know, whatever happens. You're there to be hung out to dry, so to speak. I think in the wider context, kind of looking back on my career, with the favor of hindsight, I look at decisions that I made. So just to tell my fullest story, I came to professional football after graduating college. I feel that was key for me, in that at 18, when I left Trinidad and Tobago, I don't think I was mature enough for professional football. I needed that time in the US. I needed to kind of get that understanding around time management and discipline. On the other side of that same coin, I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago playing alongside Dwight York, who many of you will know went on to play for Manchester United, won Champions League with Manchester United. That same path, I don't think would have served Dwight York well at all. Dwight came to England at 16 years old. I don't think time in the US would have. I think time in the US would have hampered his own progression. So we're different in that regard. After 3 years playing at Reading, I moved to Newcastle, and then went on to West Ham. I sometimes wonder if that path was reversed, if I went to West Ham before going on to Newcastle, and the expectation around Newcastle at the time, how would that have translated into my own career? Not that I have that many complaints, given, you know, Newcastle, we finished second twice, so it wasn't that bad. But you just wonder how those things how those things might have affected my career differently, my own performances, that path. So those are things, those are big kind of decisions that I made, and one I recognize the value of, as I mentioned, going to the US first before coming to England, and one that I'm still uncertain of. But you just have to accept that, that's the path that I took, and you kind of learn as well to live by those decisions. You don't in sport, you don't second guess, and you don't have the opportunity to second guess your decisions.
Yeah, I think that's valid across all things. It's most of the time, especially in careers, that once the decisions have made and it's put you on a particular track, it's quite hard to go back and second guess, like, oh, actually I'm going to reverse that and go do something else. And obviously I think you see more of it. It's more of a high impact statement for elite and pro athletes, because making those moves, making that team, getting cut from the team, whatever it is a big deal. But in any career, once you're on a certain track, it's very, very hard to be able to roll back and go, oh, actually, I've made a mistake and I'm going to go back and do the other thing. And I guess that is something to look at, is that you may not necessarily know the decisions at the time, but make the best decision you can and then learn what you can from making that decision, even if it's just using hindsight. Anu, I guess I'll come to you next to kind of to follow up with that, in the same vein, which is, I guess if we use hindsight to continue, it's are there specific scenarios or decisions where you look at it and go, actually, this had a big impact, and what you've kind of learned from those decisions?
Yeah, I think in hindsight, maybe in the younger years, you probably never gave it much thought because you were just going by, the trainings, the teams that you were playing. And as I said, I grew up in India. It's mad about cricket. It's probably the same for football in Germany now. But I played for my state team. That was a great opportunity. So I represented the state team, or the South Zone team, as we called it, for about a decade. And I think at that point, I never ever thought of being a professional cricketer because it wasn't really a viable option as a female cricketer in India. Of course, things have changed now, which is great to see, but I was always interested in academics and in science, and I knew I wanted to pursue a career that direction. So that sort of led to my bachelor degree and then moving to England to study. And I consider myself very fortunate that I've always had the opportunity to play cricket alongside. So whether it was for the county side or for the university team. And the biggest decision, I guess, moving to Germany was, again, driven by the choice to do a PhD and kind of academic decision. But lo and behold, there's cricket in Germany, and I got to play with some of the men's club sides for a long time. So that was a good opportunity, and got roped into the women's national side. So I think in the more recent years, probably decisions that I've consciously made are probably to get into the coaching side of things and to sort of start a women's team. So there are more girls having the opportunity to play in my city, because for 3 years or so initially, I only played in the men's squad because there was no women's team in the vicinity. And it's nice to see that has kind of led to, we've had a women's team now playing in the Bundesliga for about 6-7 years, and we are now 2-time German champions. So I'm really, that's probably my proudest thing that I can share about. And having to do coaching qualification to sort of build that team into what we're able to produce today, whether it's national players from our club or youngsters coming into the setup, and kind of setting up a pathway for women to play cricket in Germany. And also being the national captain, I think you've got to say in how some of the administrative things should be sort of pushed forward. So we do sort of drive the DCB up the wall sometimes just to get things done, because it's the women having to run the show here. And I think it's great to see that I'm just part of that one network, but there are more people who are doing this in different cities or so I think for me it's about recognizing what you can sort of give back to the sport at a certain time. And for me that's been quite a journey, because I think playing cricket as a youngster, I don't think I really was the kind of person who'd want to be the captain. Or if somebody says, hey, do you want to bowl? I'd be like, oh, maybe I'd rather not bowl. Like I was super shy, but having to take on these responsibilities, I think it's kind of given me a different perspective, and to sort of empower more women to play the sport or to coach, and to kind of help them in that pathway as a development. I think that's something that's really changed a lot in me. And that's, as I said, I think it's a decision that sort of came about more in the recent years. So yeah, that's my take on it.
It's great. Yeah, I think it's always helpful to be able to have. Sometimes the snap decisions you make have massive impact, but if you have the time to make conscious decisions, like I'm going to do this and this is the path I'm going to take, that always has a massive amount of beneficial effect, beneficial impact and knock on for yourself and for others. So I think it's a really good point to make. Alison, I'll come to you next, I guess, with the sort of the scenarios and decisions and how it has an impact on career decisions.
Yeah, I think not to copy Shaka again, but my probably most pivotal decision was also moving to the UK. So I also, I grew up in America and did my first degree in America. And I'm sure if some people know, the US sports system is very heavily reliant on playing collegiate level sport. And then for a majority of people, kind of over 90% of people, that's where their elite sporting kind of journey ends when they finish university. It's a very small percentage that get drafted to play professionally. So you have basically this pool of very talented athletes that go from, training every day, playing really high level sport to nothing. And so I was 22 and I didn't really fancy the nothing side of things. So that's what prompted me to move to the UK. And I think that's obviously been pivotal in allowing me to continue playing while most people I know who I played with back then or, playing Sunday league type football. So that's been pivotal from kind of when I look at my journey. But in terms of decisions on the pitch or training decisions, I think I imagine my football career is a series of good and bad decisions I've made on the pitch, cumulatively leading to whether that's like a decision on the pitch leading to a result in a game that's either, however it's impacted my future with the team. And I think you always will look at your decisions on what teams you went to. I played down south, and when I decided to study again and come up to Newcastle, that was a big, I enjoyed when I was playing down south. I had to then decide where I was going to play up here. And, you can always look back and wonder what if, but you'll never know, like you're saying with West Ham or whatever it might be. And I'm enjoying being at Sunderland and playing in the Championship. But yeah, I think it's hard I can't think of like one, save or goal that I've conceded that's changed my whole future. But I think there's plenty of things that I'll never know why decisions were made based on performances. But there you go.
Yeah. I do think sometimes it's, especially if decisions are made outside of your control, you can wonder and wonder and wonder, but after a certain point, it's like, you know what, this was the decision that's taken, and you have to take that, the good or the bad that comes with that. And sometimes it is useful to a bit to go back to what Shaka said, which is sometimes you just have to take it on the chin, like, this is the decision. You can't go back and look at it again, and you can't go back and reverse that decision. So just take the situation you're in and make the best of it. Emily, I'll come to you last with this sort of conversation around sort of scenarios and career decisions.
Yeah, without wanting to repeat what everyone said, I don't think there's any major decision that's been sort of put a negative effect on my career. But I mean, you're constantly, every day, you're making small decisions that you don't really think about. And like during a race or something, you have to read what's going on and you have to make a decision there and then. And it's not until after that you can look back on it and say whether it was a good decision or a bad decision. But I think learning from whichever it was, whether it was good or bad, is how you move on to making better decisions, I guess, in the future. One major decision for me was when I just decided to commit my life to rowing to see if I could make it into the national team. And well, touch wood, it's been the right decision. But I think, like everyone said, I think making the decision and then just going with it and being confident with it, and then, yeah, deciding whether it was right or wrong afterwards. You can't second guess whether it's going to be the right or the wrong decision. It's just making sure you deal with the best of whatever's put in front of you when you've made it, and not overthinking it too much.
Yeah, I think what's come through really clear from that question, and I appreciate I've thrown like 2 or 3 quite difficult questions at you for a Wednesday lunchtime. For that question, I think what's been really helpful is that whether or not it's a snap decision or a conscious decision, it's make the best of the situation that you find yourself in. Once that decision's been made, it doesn't seem like there's loads of benefits to going back and constantly going back of like, did I make the right choice? Was this the right thing to do? What if I'd done something else? What would it look like if we'd picked the other alternative? You've made that choice, that choice has been made for you in some instances. And that's how you have to cope with and just constantly recycling the same points over and over again in work, in life, in sport doesn't help anybody. You've got to deal with the stuff that's been put in front of you and the decisions that have been made. I'm conscious we haven't tackled like a half of the questions that I've either got on the event brief or that have been asked. So I apologize to people who've asked questions that we haven't got to. I will send them on and hopefully our panelists will be able to provide at least a bit of a written answer that we can pass on to you. Just to wrap up really quickly in the last sort of 3 or 4 minutes, I guess the one thing I asked everybody to bring was if there's sort of one takeaway point, takeaway tip, takeaway idea that you could give to the people who are here today that you could take from being that you could take from sport to employing into your career, what would that be? And I'm going to reverse, so I'm going to go back and start with Emily.
So one thing that's always stuck with me is one of my coaches during one of my sessions stood in front of me and he was about this close to my face and I was mid doing a piece and I was this close to a PB and he stood in front of me and he went, "You have not seen your best yet." And I think that has always stuck with me, that it's just with anything like decisions, literally anything, like push yourselves and be out of your comfort zone because that's when you will learn the most.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Sometimes you have to get out of what's comfortable for you to understand who you are, both positive and negative, and B, to find those opportunities that you wouldn't find if you were just doing the same thing every day. I think it's a really good point. Allison, to you next.
Yeah, I think the takeaway point has probably already been said. So I was trying to think of another one quickly, but I think one thing I've noticed a lot, kind of both in my football career and in healthcare, is that kind of the team behind the team needs a lot of acknowledgement and a lot of credit. I think, you know, when I look at like the football team and it being beyond the 11 players or the, you know, 23 players, you know, behind that team, you've got kind of analysts, physios, coaches, doctors, nutritionists, psychologists that are all pivotal, you know, kit men, whatever it may be, to making sure that everybody can perform at their best. And then I think similarly, you know, when people think of healthcare, they see on the face of it, they see their doctors, they see their nurses and whoever it might be, but there's this whole host of like this wider NHS team that make everything happen. And I think acknowledging that wider team and the importance of them in every success has been huge and something I've really come to appreciate.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point, which is success is much broader than the immediate individual or even immediate team, and it's vital for so many things to recognize all the roles that people play, even if it's not the flashy front of stage. It's the head doctor, it's the goalkeeper, it's the, you know, it's the 8 people in the boat. It's all the support staff that work together to get to that achievement, and it's worth making sure that you recognize those people when those achievements are achievements are achieved. Yeah. Annie, to yourself before we wrap up with Shaka.
I love these questions because it's always nice to hear from other athletes about, you know, what they think is that one key important takeaway message when we chat about these things. I mean, I guess for me, I would say in today's day and age where everything's about instant gratification, you know, I think being an athlete, you learn so much about having to put in a lot more time and effort to achieve something in the long run. So that resilience, what sport builds in you, is something you have for life. And I think additionally, based on my experience, I'd also say that one can pursue more than one passion and you can be successful in it as long as you put your, you know, mind and heart into it. And I think what you can achieve is limitless. So don't let anybody tell you that you can't do something. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point to make, which is you can tell yourself what you can and can't do. So put the most amount of effort into the stuff that you want to tackle. I don't know if it's suitable, but is it from Parks and Recreation better to whole-ass one thing than half-ass 2 things? So if you're going to do something, put the effort, put the work in. I think that's it's a vital point that a lot of time people miss or just take for granted that they're doing their best, and actually they're just doing the same stuff over and over again. Shaka, just to yourself to sort of wrap up with that kind of one final takeaway point.
One final takeaway. I always feel you have to recognize your role in the team and what's needed from you. So often, and again, just kind of going back to sporting or footballing terms, everybody wants to be that Ronaldo, that Lionel Messi, that person who's scoring a goal. But successful teams are built around so much more, around having a solid defense, having a good goalkeeper, a good midfield to support, knowing your role within that team and playing it to the best of your ability. I think where business and life can learn from sport is that when we succeed, we share in that success. I'll use my own experiences. Everybody got paid the same win bonus. We didn't all get paid the same salary, but we all got paid the same win bonus once we won. And if we didn't, regardless of who may have been at fault or who didn't do their job as well as it should, none of us got paid. So you really have to have a kind of team ethic around who you are, and recognizing your role and responsibility in that team to make that team successful. I think is absolutely vital in today's world.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. I think what I liked, just to really quickly add to that, is like you win together and you lose together. And that's something that I think a lot of time you need to take away when you're thinking about teamwork. The good times are good for everybody. The bad times are equally something that should be shared rather than putting it on one person. That's great. I'm so sorry that's all the time we've got. I feel like I've barely touched this conversation. I could really quite happily spend the rest of the afternoon talking to all of you about all this stuff. I've got loads of stuff to ask, which we've got nowhere close. I really don't know where this last hour's gone. I'm hoping everybody who's attended has found this event really useful, really insightful. I hope you've been able to take away some really great learning points. Thank you so much to all our panelists for giving up their time, giving their knowledge and their insight. A couple of things. Next month's Develop session, quite serendipitously, is on how to manage up effectively. So I know we touched about it in this meeting. So if it is something you're interested in, please do sign up. It's free to sign up for everybody who's interested. A final thank you again to Shaka, Anu, Allison, and Emily. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who took their time out on a Wednesday lunchtime to attend. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and I hope that we can see you at another event soon. Good afternoon, everybody, and goodbye.